My father introduced me, and now it's my son's turn. Woodworking is a passion we'll share forever. Woodcraft understands that. Their people know the right tool for the job, and they make sure we understand how to use it. Their help? It means a lot. Woodcraft knows how we feel because they feel the same way. You know, I enjoy sharing my secrets, and now Jake's teaching me some things too. Woodcraft, helping you make wood work.
Tight Bond Wood Glues, the pro's advantage.
Hello and welcome to I Can Do That. I'm your host, Chad Stanton, and today's project is this little jewelry box. Now, this jewelry box is a little bit different from most that you might see. To begin with, I was inspired by some of the Asian style jewelry boxes. And so most jewelry boxes would lift from the lid, not this one. Let me show you some features to it. To begin with, we have these decorative holes on the side. Now, although those look nice, they actually serve a purpose, and I'll show you in a second. This jewelry box actually splits open down the middle, and we hold it together with some rare earth magnets. Once it's open, it reveals these 6 little drawers. And remember those holes that were on the side? Well, that's actually what allows you to push the drawer open. Now, this project, although it's small, it's quite challenging. We're going to maximize the use of our router table on this. And you can see that these drawers have some very tiny little joinery work, some rabbet cuts on there. I'll show you how to do that. And also, because this is small, we're going to be using more hand tools, so we're going to improve our skills with that. So all in all, I think you're going to find that this is a fun and challenging project to do. But we're going to show you how to do it every single step of the way. So let's get started. I'm going to begin with our jewelry box on making the inside. Now, this box can get a little bit confusing because what's the front, when it opens, now becomes the side. So to keep things simple and consistent, I'm always going to refer to the parts in the closed position. So on the inside of the box, I'm actually going to be working on this part here. Now, this started off as my prototype, and so I made a couple of changes. I liked the contrast between the shelf and the drawer, but you notice I didn't put a top on that. So that's one of the changes I'm making. Essentially, we have a box within a box, so I'm focusing on this inner box. The inner box, the material is made up of some 1/4 inch by 6 inch material that you can just pick up at the big box store. Now, I need to cut these parts that will make up the front, the sides, the backs, and then of course all the shelves. And all those measurements have to be cut exactly for these boxes to all go together. Now, those sizes, well, you can get those with the plans at the end of this video. Now, to help me get these accurate cuts, I'm going to use a stop block on my miter saw. That way, I can cut it, take the piece out, and make the next one. Then I'll have to readjust that block for the other pieces. But at least I can get started with it. Now, before I make my cuts, it's important to kind of maybe pay attention to the grain of the wood. Once again, these inside pieces, well, they're not really going to be seen because they're going to be covered up by the second box that goes around it. However, that front one will be seen. And so if you have a piece of wood that has a nice decorative grain pattern to it, make sure you mark that so that the grain comes together when you close your box. Okay, I'm going to make some cuts now. So I've cut my front, side, and back for the box. And now I need to cut for the individual shelf pieces. Now, it would seem simple that I could take my material, which is 5.5 inches, and the size that I need is 5.5 inches. It would be simple to make the one cut because it has to be 4.5 inches wide. However, I don't want the end grain to show for the shelf. I'd rather have the edge grain. So I actually have to make two cuts. So this is my 5.5 inches by 5.5 inches, and now I need to cut a rip cut on it at 4.5. And again, I'm going to do that in the miter saw. Now, because this is a small cut, if you're concerned about holding this piece in place, you could use some self-adhesive sandpaper, put that down here, and that will help grip and hold your piece in place for you. Well, I've got 3 more shelves to cut, and then we'll move on to the next step. I have the front, side, and back. And the front and back, well, it's going to get a rabbet on all 3 edges. That's what's going to hold the top and the side in place. I have it set up in the router here with a 1/4 inch bit that's raised up 1/8 of an inch, and the fence is pushed back 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to start by routing across the workpiece, the cross grain. This is because it's going to want to blow out the wood on the end as the bit exits. So we'll do that first, and I have the sacrificial board set up on my sled to help prevent that. It's a good idea to do a couple of practice cuts on a scrap piece of wood to make sure that your height and setting is perfect. The next thing to do is to make the dados on these pieces to take in the shelves. By measuring over 2 inches from the edge of the workpiece, where the groove for the dado is going to be, that's going to give me equal spaces of 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches, and 1.5 inches. So without changing the height of the bit, I just simply moved the fence back to 2 inches. And now I can make those dado grooves. Okay, I'm going to do the same for the other pieces, and then we can start assembling this. Assembling these pieces can be awkward because they're thin and there's multiple pieces to put in all at the same time. So what's going to help me with this is a bench hook. Now, a bench hook is a really handy thing to have around your shop. It's just simply a piece of wood with 2 cleats at both ends. This cleat is going to go against the edge of my bench, and this, well, I'm going to use it like a fence. All right, so here's the procedure for putting this together. I'm going to put some glue in the dados and the rabbets all around for the front and back pieces. And I trim the bristles down on this brush because it's going to make it easier getting in the grooves. All right, I'm going to begin with one of the shelves and put that on there. And I'm just going to use a little bit of tape to help hold some of this because it definitely gets awkward. I'll place in the other shelves. Again, a piece of tape. placing the back, oops, come on, placing the back on here. Placing the side on. All right. Now when I put these clamps on it, I'm going to have to use several of them so I get good pressure. But also too, I need to double check to make sure that as I add the clamps that this stays in square. That looks pretty good. All right, I'll grab some more clamps, set this aside, and we'll move on to the next step after that. I have both of the box units here, and I have to admit, no matter how much I measured to keep these square and clamped them up, when I placed them together, they were off a little bit. So you're going to have to do some sanding and planing because you're trying to get the least amount of gap between them and keeping it square at the same time. Now I'm going to go with that other layer that wraps around it. On the prototype, I used walnut, but in this case, I'm going to use some oak. Now you might think that this 1/4 inch oak, which is the same 6 inches in height, you might think that I can just place it on the corner, come down and cut it. But we're not doing that. Again, it's going to wrap all the way around. So you have to compensate for the side pieces. And also, the front is going to get cut in half too. So I have to compensate for that width of the blade. In this case, my blade is 1/8 of an inch, so I added a little extra there. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because I want the grain to match instead of doing just individual pieces. Also, too, when I cut this, I might not go right on that 1/8. I might go a little bit larger, like an extra 1/16, in case I'm off. If the piece is a little bit larger, when I put it on, it'll be easy to sand or plane that off versus if the piece is a little bit short. All right, let me cut the pieces for what will be the front and back, and then I'll come back and talk to you about doing the rabbets on the ends. The front and back pieces on this oak that's going around it, I'm only going to have to do a rabbet cut on the ends, unlike on this box where he had the rabbet on all 3 sides. Now for the sides, I'm not working off of those plans again because of the sanding and planing I did on this. I can clamp these in place and I can take a measurement and cut it a little bit heavy. That way I can sneak up on it and get a nice tight fit. And then the top and bottom for this, well, it's actually some 3/4 inch material, and we'll be doing that later. But that's the reason we didn't need the rabbets for the top and bottom, because there's no other piece going in between there. I managed to cut the front and back so they're exactly the same size. Now I can place them on the box with the rabbet joint flush with the side of the poplar box. And now I can measure this for what will be the side. Again, it's not a bad idea to cut this piece a little long and slowly sneak up on it so you have a good fit, tight joint. Now, I'm not ready to glue this on yet because I still need to cut out the circle for the front of this. So I'm going to get set up for that next. From the plans, I was able to make a template for the circle that's going to go on the front pieces, and I traced it on there. Now I'm cutting it out with the coping saw, and then I'm going to clean it up with the rasp and file and shave right down to that line. Now when I put this in the vise to cut it, I'm not going to clamp this far down on it, because as I saw this is going to want to vibrate, I could even possibly crack and split it. So I'm going to go down, make my cuts, and then slowly move the piece up until I get the circle. And then it's using the file and sandpaper after that. I've been busy putting the oak pieces around on the box, and I just put some glue on it and applied the front first, and then I did the same. I put glue and put the side on, and that's because I want to align that rabbet joint. And then of course lastly I did the back, doing the same thing, aligning it. So the tape is just temporarily holding these pieces on while I get the clamps ready. And while this is drying up, I'm going to start working on the top and bottom for the box. I'm working on the top and bottom pieces, and it's this 1/2" round over that I'm dealing with. Now on the prototype, I did it in my handheld router. Reason being is that this router bit is larger than the opening on my router table. Now yes, I could drill that hole bigger on the router table, but this is a small router table with a small router, and I want to keep it just for small parts. If this is larger, I have more opportunity for pieces to fall or get stuck in there. Now if you don't have another router, this is an opportunity for us to change the design a little bit. I've decided to go with the chamfer on it. And this is easily done with the block plane. So the first thing I want to do is I want to measure over 1/4 inch and make a mark on all the edges. Now this is another opportunity for your bench hook. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be planing all the way across this, working the plane down to these 2 pencil lines. However, as this plane comes out the back to exit, it's going to want to fracture and explode that wood. So I'm first going to start by taking a little bit of that off. Now I can come back and work this edge. And again, I'll continue doing that until I hit both of those pencil lines, turn it around, do the other end, and then go with the grain. After that, I'm going to show you how we're going to put this cove on there to give us some feet on the bottom of the box. Okay, so I've been talking about this cove here to make the feet, and let me explain that because I'm kind of cheating it. It's not exactly full feet. What I did was I just used a cove bit and routed out a little bit. So it's actually truly flat along the bottom, but it gives the impression like it has some feet. Now the way I have this set up is I have a cove bit in the router table, and I have the fence set so it's exactly along the middle of the router bit. Also too, the router bit is raised up 1/4 inch. Now you probably notice these blocks on it. That serves a purpose. This here is the distance that I want to put that cove in. What I need to do is measure from the back mark to the front edge, which in this case is 5.5 inches. It's the same from the front mark to the back edge. Now on the router table, I'm going from the back part of the bit here, and I'm measuring forward to 5.5 inches. That's where I put that stop block. And same thing with this one, from the front edge of that router bit, going back to 5.5 inches and putting a stop block. Now to do this, you have to use some caution because I'm going to have that bit spinning and I have to ease the board into it until it comes flush with the fence. Then I'm going to move it forward till it hits the stop block and again ease it out. I'll do both sides. Okay, I have to readjust the stop blocks to do the same thing along the grain of the wood here. And then after I get that done, well, I'm going to show you how we're going to put these scratch marks in for our top for that little extra detail. And I'm doing that with a marking gauge. Now, most marking gauges will have this pin here. And the pin will work fine for when you're going with the grain. But as you go across the grain, well, it's going to rip the fibers of the wood, and it's not going to look very nice. So a knife marking gauge will do a much better job because that knife edge will actually sever the fibers of the wood. Now, the trick is getting the marks to start and stop in the right place. So I went ahead and I have a couple of pencil marks on here of a 1/2 inch all the way around. And on my marking gauge, I made a line that shows right up to the edge of that knife. And so I should be able to push this in and drag it across. And I'll do this a few times, going a little bit deeper each time. And I'll continue that all the way around. Now, if you don't have one of these, you can do it with a straight edge and a carving knife or even an X-Acto blade. But I like the knife marking gauge because it has a fence that rides along the edge of the board. It should be a little bit more accurate. All right, let me do this detail and I'll come back and we have to cut this in half again. All right, so I have the drawer units back here again, and I did take some time to sand and plane them. It's really important to be extra particular on this because I don't want a big gap, and the top has to be nice and flat because when we put the cap on it, we want this being flush. Any inconsistencies is just going to be a mess, so take your time with that. Now, what I've done is I've gone ahead and measured and drilled the holes that will be able to push the drawers out. On this one, I still have to do it. So I've put some tape on it, which will help prevent any kind of splintering or tear out that I might get from the drill bit. I also used an awl to kind of make a reference mark to where I want to start. Now, when I drill through, it's going to want to probably blow out and shatter the inside of the drawer. So I have a scrap piece of wood here that I can slide this over, and now when I drill, I have some support behind it. It's a nice clean hole. Now, once I get these other two done, I still want to do some scratch stock on the front surface and the sides, and that's done the same manner that I did the top. I'm ready to glue all these pieces together, but it's going to be awkward because once I get glue on the top and glue on the bottom, trying to keep everything lined up. I'm pretty certain it's going to slip and slide on me. So I'm going to cut my problems down by doing it in segments. I'm just going to glue the bottom on to start with. Now I want to make sure that this stays together, so I'm going to put a clamp across the front of this. And I'm checking to make sure that the seams all line up and making small adjustments. Now I'm going to put a clamp, pushing down on this top and clamping it to the bench, basically sandwiching it all together. Looks good. Now once that dries, I'll be able to glue the top on, and it's going to be a whole lot easier keeping that aligned, so when we open and close it, it'll look nice. The next thing I want to do is I want to put the magnets in that are going to hold this together. Now these are rare earth magnets, but they're also super magnets. They're pretty tiny, but trust me, they have a lot of power to them. Now the magnets have the polar opposites to them. You want to make sure that you mark them so that they're pulling each other together and not pushing each other apart. All right, on my box, I've already marked where I want the magnets to go. So let me drill and try and set one in there. You want these magnets flush with it. You don't want them in too deep, and you don't want them sticking out. This drill bit is slightly smaller than the magnet, so I'll chamfer it to hope to ease that magnet in. And I'll put a little glue in there as well. I'm using a little wooden dowel to kind of strike it in place. Nice. That's really good. Okay, I'm going to do the other three, and while that glue is drying on the magnets, I'm going to start fitting the drawers. I'm getting ready to make the drawers. Now, if I did my measuring right, this should be 1.5 inches, and the stuff from the store, 1/4 inch by 1.5 inches. So in theory, it should fit. In my case, it doesn't. I could have been off a little bit on the router table, or maybe this is just a little bit larger from the store. Now, if you have some wider material that you have in your shop and you're going to use, if you have a table saw, that'll make ripping it down nice and easy. If you don't, I would suggest using a hand saw to rip this. Okay, let me show you how I want to fit the height of the drawer first. Again, I'm going to use my shooting board and a block plane. And I'm going to shave off just a little bit, sneaking up on the fit. Pretty close. That's good. Okay, now I need to cut it to length. And I want the drawer front and the back to go the whole length of the opening of the drawer. So I'm going to use a mechanical pencil here because I can get a really accurate measurement. Now let me test the fit. Okay, I'm still a little big, but I don't have to use the saw to trim this up. Again, I can use the block plane and the bench hook, and I'm using it like a shooting board. Now, I don't want this out real far. I want it as close to this cleat as possible, because as the blade comes through, it's going to want to fracture and splinter the wood on the back side. Okay, good. That's a nice fit. Now, I'm going to drop this all the way in there. And I'm going to take some more material to measure for the sides. And again, I'm going to cut it the same way that I did that back. Now, this is actually going to give me an accurate measurement, because take a look at our drawer here. You can see that we have a rabbet on the front and on the side. We also have that same rabbet on the back. So because this is a 1/4 inch, we're taking an 1/8 inch off. We're also taking an 1/8 inch off here. So together, that's a 1/4 inch, which is the thickness of one of these pieces. That's how I can get this measurement and do all the drawer pieces. Now let me get all 4 drawer pieces, and I'm going to show you again how we're going to make that rabbet cut and how we're going to glue this little box up. I have the front, the back, and the side pieces, and they're all going to get the same rabbet cut on them, which is an 1/8 of an inch. So in the router, I have the 1/4 inch bit back in it. I have it raised up an 1/8 of an inch, and I have the fence going right down the middle of the router. So essentially only an 1/8 inch of the router bit is sticking out. Now I did a couple of practice cuts to make sure that my fit is good, and so now I'm going to put the rabbet cuts on these. All right, I'm not quite done with the router yet, because the bottom is going to go in, and the bottom is some more 1/4 inch wood, and I want it flush with the sides, which means it has to go down a 1/4 inch. So I'm going to push this fence back a little bit, an 1/8 of an inch, and then I will run my pieces in it and make that rabbet cut. And then I'll show you how I start putting the bottom in. Okay, now I'm getting ready to glue the drawer up. Now the bottom is going to be the full length of one of the side pieces. And the width is just from the inside of the rabbeted part. Okay, now let me show you how you glue this up. Because it's small and you have a lot of tiny pieces, once again, the bench hook comes into play here. So I'm going to put a little tape on this. And a little bit of glue. And same with the sides. I'm going to hold this against that back cleat, and I'm going to put the side on. Now it's important to pay attention where you're putting the side, because you can place this on either position of that rabbet, but I want the front to be flush with that side. And this tape is just going to help hold it in place. Stay in place. And let me test fit the bottom. All right, it's a little long, but not a big deal because I can use my bench hook again. And I'm using it, like I said, as a shooting board, and I'll just shave some off. Pretty good. I'm going to put some glue on that, and then I'll clamp it up, make sure it's square, and let that dry. The next thing to get closer to finishing the jewelry box is putting the hinges on. Now, when you're buying your hinges, make sure that you don't have too much slop in the pin, because that's going to play an effect how this box opens and closes to keeping your gap tight. Also, too, make sure that the screws aren't real long, because those screws could go into the drawer, affecting the operation. Okay, now as far as the finish on this, on the original, I made it out of walnut, and I just used some boiled linseed oil on that, and that naturally made the wood nice and dark. If I used that same oil over here on the oak, it wouldn't be that dark. I could stain this to do that, but I have to be careful, because if I want the poplar to stay that natural color and I'm putting on some dark stain, it's real easy to mess that up. So a good tip is, on all the poplar areas, you would first put some clear shellac. That way, when you put the stain on it, if you do touch the poplar, it'll wipe right off. Well, I hope you like this project. It's a little bit more intricate than the ones we've done in the past, but you're using your router more, you've learned some new joints, and we were able to practice some of our hand skills on it. All of that advances your woodworking skills. Well, I hope you tune in for another episode of I Can Do That. We'll see you next time.